Welcome to week 2 of Lent. The title of our sermon this morning, here we are, a sermon title, Lent 2025, 40 Days to a New You. Who is looking forward to a new version of yourself in 40 days? Who's excited for transformation and new life and resurrection, which is what we are moving toward. But in order to get there, we have to go through the darkness and the tomb and the death, which are not comfortable aspects of life that we enjoy talking about. But you are all brave souls because you are here and you know that that's what we're doing in Lent. So good for you. And my prayer for you, one of the things that we're praying for throughout the week is that you will be transformed. That's the purpose of Lent. That's why we go through Lent, and then we will joyously celebrate resurrection together in a few weeks. Now, today's sermon title, The Gift of the Broom Bush. Now, I have to say, I am very excited for this sermon. As I mentioned, we're in Lent, and Lent every single year we talk about the same themes because we need those themes. We need to sit with these ideas and sit in the season of Lent year after year. So it's a season of reflection, purging, cleansing, silence, repentance. As I mentioned, death to new life so that we are ready and open to receive resurrection when it comes. Now, today's sermon, we are going to look at the story of Elijah in the wilderness. And what we're doing throughout this series is we are taking stories in the Bible that center on the idea of 40, because 40 is a highly symbolic number in the Bible. It shows up again and again. It talks about this new beginning, rebirth, a new cycle is beginning. Each week, we will take a different story of 40. We will pull it apart. We'll inspect it, analyze it, and ask, what does it mean for us in our lives today? What does it mean for us as we are journeying through Lent together? And as we begin this sermon, I have a disclaimer for us, and it's that I preached on this same story exactly 1 year ago. So partially I'll be plagiarizing myself this morning. I have to give credit where credit is due. And it's funny because I started thinking about this series a couple of weeks ago. I started putting down all the different stories that had to do with 40, and I had forgotten that I actually preached on this story a year ago. As I was going through it this week and finishing up my outline, I realized, wait a second, this sounds really familiar. I think I've given this sermon before. And then I looked back at my notes and I realized 3/17/24. So as I said, 1 year ago, St. Patty's Day last year, I gave a sermon on this particular story. And then as I was kind of going through the sermon and putting it together, I realized that my understanding of this story and what it means for us and the perspective, the way in which I'm looking at it now a year later, it shifted a little bit. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about Scripture. You read a story and you're going through something. And so you read into it in a particular way. But then you read the story again 6 months or a year later, and you've grown. You've shifted. You've expanded. There's more depth within you. And so because there's more depth within you, because you've grown, you're now able to see more of the depth that's been there the entire time. That's why for me, whenever there's really boring interpretations or ways of looking at the Bible, and we all know those ways that are really boring, and you sit there and you're like, oh my goodness, really? Are we going there? It's because the person talking about it, they're not minding the depth of that passage, the wisdom that's there. And so as I'm looking at this story now, I feel like I'm seeing more depth that has always been there. And I said, this sermon, like it was good last year, but this one, this year, it's even better. Like we were here last year, but now we're here with, or I guess if we're saying depth, we were here, but now we're here with this one. So we're going to look at the story of Elijah in the wilderness. It begins 1 Kings chapter 19. Little background as we begin. Elijah has just had this major showdown with the prophets of Baal. And some of the people in Israel who were worshiping Baal, the king and his wife, they are very angry with Elijah. Elijah is a prophet. He's a spokesperson for God. He says, we can't be worshiping Baal in Israel because our God, Yahweh, is the only true God, and we can't be split in our allegiance. So we have to just worship Yahweh alone. He defeats these prophets of Baal, but then the leadership, those in charge, are extremely angry with him. And here's where we pick up the story. In verse 1, Ahab, the king, told his wife Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how Elijah had killed all the prophets with the sword. That's another sermon right there. Just please set that to the side for a moment, and we can talk about that at a later point in time. Basically, Elijah has just defeated and destroyed all these prophets of Baal, the God that Ahab, his wife Jezebel, were following. So they are, could we say, extremely upset with Elijah for defeating, destroying their gods and their entire way of organizing their lives. So Jezebel, hearing this, sent a messenger to Elijah to say this: may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Essentially, Elijah is wanted dead or alive, preferably dead. This is your first wanted poster right there, 1 Kings chapter 19. And bonus points for anyone, I found this, I had Googled it and I decided to go with this one. Mad Dog Tannen, what's the movie reference to this one? Back to the Future, yes. That was Ted. I gave him the answer before. This is how the story begins. It continues. Elijah, well, of course, as anyone would be, if the king and his wife and all of their servants, people following them, want to kill you, you're going to be afraid, are you not? This is a normal response. He's afraid, and then what does he do? He runs for his life, as any of you would do. This is the human response. All these people want to kill me because I have done them harm. I am going to run away so that they cannot capture me. Now, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. He wants to be alone. He had someone who was supporting him, who was with him, but what we're finding right here is that he's come to a point when he does not want anyone around him. You ever been there before? You're going through a difficult moment in life. Something has just happened. Life is extremely hard. There's people that have supported you, but the truth is you need some space. You need some time. You need to be alone. So Elijah leaves his servant there, and I have a map for us. Mount Carmel is where Elijah was with these prophets of Baal. And at this point, he has traveled from here down to Beersheba, where he leaves his servant. He says, all right, end of the road for you, son. I am going off on my own. Continues verse 4. While he, Elijah himself, went a day's journey into the wilderness. He leaves his servant in a city. He travels off by himself into the wilderness. Think about last week. What did we talk about? Jesus in the wilderness. Lent is a season of being in the wilderness. Who would like to be in the wilderness for an extended period of time? A time of hardship? I saw a few hands and I immediately went down when I said hardship. A barren wasteland? How about that one? Yeah, no takers on that. Yet Elijah intentionally leaves everything behind in order to go into this desolate wasteland. He came to a broom bush. He sat down under it, and like any of you would do, he prayed that he might die. Life is too hard. Please take my life from me. We'll have to add that prayer request to the list for this week. I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. You've all been there, right? You've gone through something, you have no energy, no motivation, and you just lay down, and the only thing you can do is sleep. Yeah, Elijah's in the wilderness. He's depressed, clearly. He's apathetic, and he's suicidal. Take my life, God. That is his prayer. I don't want to be in the land of the living. Elijah is at an extremely, extremely low point. Here's a few ways in which we might be able to translate this for us in our lives. You ever experienced this where you have gave it your all and you feel as if you have nothing left in the tank to give? Or what about this one? You ever feel like your best is behind you? You've had these experiences in life. You've had these highlights, these moments, these pinnacles of success. You're up here, and then you come crashing down because you're hit with this thought that I will never be able to get back to where I was before. Elijah just had this great moment of success. He defeated the prophets of Baal. He did exactly what God had tasked him to do. This was a moment, a pinnacle, a high mountain experience for Elijah, and now he's crashing down because the euphoria of the moment has now left him. And the only thing that he can do is sit under this bush and hope that God will take his life from him. I will never be able to regain the glory days that I once experienced. Or how about this one? Have you ever given it your all and you still feel like a failure? You had this desired result, or maybe there was an expected outcome. You thought, if I were to do this, and then whenever you work God into the mix, that's where it really gets wonky, because you start to think, well, I did this. If I were to do this for God, well, then surely God will bless me in this way. And then you step out, you do it, you take that risk, and that expected outcome doesn't take place. And so there's this bitterness that starts to creep up within. There's this resentment that you carry around within you. Maybe it's directed toward yourself, toward someone else, toward God. Well, God, here's Elijah. I did all this for you, God, and now they want to take my life? I mean, God, come on, what's the deal? I was your prophet. I was your boy. And now, you've abandoned me. Or how about this one? You've had this moment of victory, and then, like we were saying, you feel like you've been abandoned. I mean, here's Elijah. He goes into the wilderness. It's as if his soul was inviting him, was pushing him here, because the wilderness, it was a symbol for what he was feeling within. This desolate wasteland, well, that's what his soul felt like at that moment, because he felt like everyone and everything had abandoned him. Even the God that he had put his trust in had abandoned him. You ever experience a moment like this before? So he comes to this broom bush. And remember, the title of the sermon is what? The gift of the... Now, a broom bush. This plant's ability to grow in barren landscapes made it a symbol of survival and resilience. We have this really low point in Elijah's life. He's depressed. He is suicidal. He's apathetic. But yet mixed into the story, we have a symbol of hope right here in the beginning. Yes, he's in the wilderness, but the broom bush is there with him as well. It's this sign that I know it looks bleak, but the story's not over. I know it feels like all is lost, but in the midst of that, there's a broom bush. And what does this bush symbolize? Hope. Hope. It's really dark right now. It feels hopeless. It feels like there's no future. But yet in the midst of all of that, there is this bush providing shade for Elijah, so that his skin is not scorched by the heat. All at once, while he's there, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around like, whoa, where's that voice coming from? Well, What? Am I hearing voices in my head now? There by his head was some bread baked over hot coals. I mean, come on. Anyone else? You want lunch baked by an angel today? Like, come on. Please get the hot coals, angel, and bake me some bread. And a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then what did he do? Yeah, when you're depressed, what's the only thing that you can do? Sleep. Exactly. I mean, this normalizes our moments of depression, our moments of hopelessness. Elijah is someone who is seen as a hero of the faith. If you were to think of all the models of faith that we have in the Bible, Elijah is pretty much up at the top. You have Moses, you have Abraham, obviously Jesus, right? Moses, Abraham. Well, Elijah is pretty much up here on the top. Here's Matthew 17, right before Jesus goes to the cross. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them who? Moses and who? Because Elijah is a hero of the faith, just like Moses. And they are talking with Jesus. Two people from the Old Testament talking with Jesus as he's transfigured before he goes to the cross. Who are they? Moses and Elijah. At this point in the story in Kings, what is Elijah doing? He is depressed. See, sometimes we feel, or others feel, there's other voices telling us, well, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're feeling fatigued, defeated, hopeless, I have the antidote. Here's what you need to do. Well, you just need to pray more. And the way out of your depression is to pray longer and harder. And if you were just to pray, because that's your problem. The problem is that there's this disconnect between you and God. And so if you were just to pray more, if you were to wake up earlier, if you were to go to bed later, if you were to give everything up and carve out more time for you to pray with God, well, then everything would be solved. Or what about this one? Well, the problem is, the reason why you're feeling that way is because you don't trust God enough. And you just need to white knuckle it. And you just need to have more trust. Or you just need more faith. You need more belief. We'll pray that belief and that faith and that trust into you. Those are not friends. Those are not people who are helping you on your spiritual journey, who are telling you the way to get out of your funk is just to do more. I have a big no. That is not helpful. Not helpful. We have Elijah, a hero of the faith. Did God tell him to pray more? Did God tell him to have more faith, Elijah? Just to trust in God more, and if you trust more in God, everything will be resolved. No. What did Elijah need? Rest. Sleep. When you are feeling fatigued, defeated, you just need to rest and do absolutely nothing, or, as in the case of Elijah, go and take a nap. Call off work and crawl into bed for the afternoon. Lent is this time where we remove particular things in our lives so that we can create more space. Usually, we give up something in the beginning of Lent. I know we're about a week and a half into Lent, but it's okay. I'm giving you permission. You can still give something up for Lent. You can still say no. So here's a question for Lent. Is there anything that you've been saying yes to? And you need to say no. You need to remove it from your life for this season. Are you putting too much on your plate? Is there too much going on and it is creating this sense of fatigue, hopelessness within you, and you just need to say no, create more space so that during the season of Lent, you can actually give yourself to rest. This is what Elijah needed. The hero of the faith did not need to go to more Bible studies. He did not need to go to more church services. He needed to take a nap in the wilderness underneath a broom bush. Maybe you need to go on Amazon and order yourself a broom bush and then take a nap under it and then wait for the angel to come with the bread and the water. You might be waiting a while. Angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, "Get up and eat. For the journey, it's too much for you." There it is again. It's too much. You're trying to do it all on your own, Elijah. You're making it about, it's too much for you. You need some help. You need something to come alongside you and to offer you sustenance. Elijah got up, ate, drank, strengthened by that food. He traveled. Here's our magic number for Lent. How many days and nights? Until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. 40 days, 40 nights. Sirens should be going off. Lights should be flashing at this point. Whenever you're reading scripture and you come across the number 40, pause for a moment and remind yourself, okay, this is a new cycle that's about to happen. It's a new beginning. It's a rebirth or a repurpose. There was an old way of doing things, and now the new is about to emerge. Elijah travels 40 days, 40 nights. It's a symbol that he is about to be refreshed. Something new is about to emerge in his life. I would guess that this is what some of you need right now in this moment. That's why I called the series 40 Days to a New You, because I believe that many of you here this morning, you need the new. You need a rebirth. You need a new beginning. As we sang this morning, you need a new filling, a refilling of the Spirit so that you are re-energized. You've been limping along for a while. And I've been there before. It doesn't feel good. And you're just doing everything within yourself. You're trying to muster up the strength to keep going. And you're asking yourself, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel so tired? If I were just to push through this, well, then I can make it to the other side. But the answer is no. You actually need to take a nap. You need to rest and allow yourself to be strengthened by a source of power beyond yourself. Here's the angel. It's too much for you. Here's some divine sustenance that will strengthen you for your journey, that will carry you through this season of rebirth. Now, how do we get there? It's the question for us. Because my guess is that's probably the question that you're asking. You're like, this all sounds great, but how do I get there? How do I allow Lent to be that renewing, transformative time? The story continues. He's in this cave. The word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? I love that. This God who knows all things. Elijah, why are you here? Then there's this wind, earthquake, fire. Most of us know how the story goes. God wasn't in any of the noise, but then there was this gentle whisper. And in the silence, Elijah recognized this was the Spirit. So Elijah steps out of the cave at this moment, and verse 13, a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" This is the question. The second time this question was asked, "Hey, Elijah, what are you doing here?" This, I believe, is the question for us this season of Lent. And I believe there are a few ways in which we can look at this question. First, what are you doing here? It can refer to the physical location. Elijah traveled to Mount Horeb, which also is known as Mount Sinai. Do we know what happened at Mount Sinai? The Ten Commandments. This was the moment after the Israelites were rescued from Egypt. They camped at the base of Mount Sinai, And at this moment is when God entered into a covenant, a relationship with the Israelites. This is where Moses went up to the mountain for how many nights and days? 40 days and nights, magic number, and received the 10 Commandments, this way of being in the world. So Elijah travels to this very, very holy mountain. 1 Kings is called the mountain of God because in Elijah's mind, he thinks that in some way, God is more present there on that mountain than anywhere else. So he goes there in order to meet with God. That's why Elijah travels all the way to Mount Horeb, because he thinks, if I were just to get to this holy place, this holy mountain, well, there would be some divine revelation. Something would happen. Here's the way in which I translate this question. If you're looking at it simply from the physical location, hey, Elijah, what do you need? What do you need in this moment? Think about your life right now, where you are. What do you need from God? And not like, oh, I need a Big Mac. Maybe Whopper is your preferred choice. But what do you truly, I don't know where it comes from. But what do you truly need for your soul to thrive? What do you need to feel whole again? To feel life within you? So the first question for us to ask in this season of Lent, as we carve out space for silence and reflection, as we say no, what do you need in this moment, in this season where you find yourself? Here's that question. What are you doing here? Here's another way in which we could interpret this question. What are you doing here instead of there? Because we always have a choice. You can be here or you can be there. You can't be both places. You can be here or there. Every decision that you make, every time that you plant your feet somewhere, you're saying no to every other place where you could possibly be. So what are you doing here? And some commentators, they believe that God is calling Elijah out, as if God is angry with Elijah, because Elijah is a prophet of God. His position, he's supposed to be in Israel. So some commentators say, well, God is angry because Elijah has left his post. But is that really what's going on here? Do you see a God who is angry at Elijah because it's as if he has abandoned his position? But if you read the story, that way of looking at it makes absolutely no sense, because God is the one who had been strengthening him for this journey of retreat, for his time of rest. So what I would argue, what I would say as we look at this here instead of there aspect of this question, it's as if this is a gentle, loving reminder from God. Hey, Elijah, are you missing something? It's like you know deep within you that there's this purpose, this task, this assignment, or this step that you are being invited, you're being called to take. And you turn your back on that for a bit because maybe it's going to ask too much of you, or you feel as if you don't have the energy to step into it at that particular moment. I think what's happening here is God's asking this question to Elijah. It's this gentle reminder, hey, is there a way for you to tap into your true self? Have in any way you created this false self? Have you run from that which you know you are being invited to do? Or is there any way in which you're running from the assignment, the task that you know deep within your soul is the thing for you to do? It's this loving, gentle reminder. Hey, are you missing something? You're here, but do you truly believe that that's the best for your life? And then here's a third way of looking at this question. What are you doing here? This is the existential question. Like, what are you doing with your life? Which is a really hard question to answer. Like, what's the purpose of your entire life, Elijah? What's the meaning of your life? What is your identity? Yeah, no pressure, exactly. It's a question that we ask all the time. So when God is asking this question of Elijah, I think this is a great question for us to explore and answer. What are we basing our life on? What is the larger purpose that we are living for? Now, this question, how are we transformed? How do we allow Lent to be that renewing, transformative time? Here is the answer for us this morning. The Lord said to him, after all of this, go back the way you came. Go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king of Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet. Go back. The Hebrew word shub, which means to return. Return to your purpose. Return to the truest version of yourself, because we've all gotten lost along the way. It's the purpose of Jesus. Jesus comes to return us to our truest selves, the people that we were created to be. As we follow Jesus, we are transformed into the truest version of who we are. What God is telling Elijah, return to who you know you are. The person you know yourself to be deep in your soul, in those moments of stillness and quietness, when all the other noise, all the other voices are gone, return to that which you know to be true. But at the same time, as you return, it's going to look a little different. You can't go back and be the same version of yourself that you were before. I came across this as I was studying this story. Renewal occurs by returning to one's roots. How are we renewed? How are we transformed? By returning to that which we know to be true about ourselves. Yeah, there's many different ways that we have lost it, that we've walked away from the truth that God speaks over us. There's many ways that we've distorted that. We are renewed by returning back to who we know ourselves to be, the purpose, the passion that God has placed within our hearts. What God is saying to Elijah when he says go back, he's saying your time isn't up. See, Elijah thought it was over. That's it. End of story. He went into the desert to die. That was his prayer. And yet God's like, no, it's not over. Elijah, you have more to give. There's more life in you. That is the message of God over you this morning. If any of you feel like you're in this wasteland, like you're in a place of barrenness, if any of you feel fatigued, defeated, given up, the Spirit speaks over you this morning. No, your time isn't up. There's more within you to give. There's more life that you're carrying within you, life for you to offer the world in service. But in order to get there, you need to step into this new version of yourself. See, sometimes you're tired, you're depressed because you're trying to be an earlier version of yourself, and that version doesn't exist anymore. You're trying to go back, but in reality, that version of who you were, it's no longer there, and now the Spirit is inviting you into a new expression of who you are. This is what happened with Elijah. It's a sign that when you feel that way, what you're doing, who you're trying to be, what you're believing about yourself, it isn't working, and you need the new. So you return in a different way. Think about Elijah. He had the same purpose, to be a spokesperson for God, to lead the Israelites in their faith, but now it's being expressed differently. And he received wisdom into how to do that by resting. by saying no, by being silent, creating space to listen. As we journey through Lent, the question we're being invited to ask of ourselves, what are you doing here? What do you need right now? Because that's where it starts. What do you need? And then what's the next step that the Spirit is inviting you to take? Is there anything you need to leave behind? Is there any way in which you've abandoning that in your soul that you know to be true and you need to return to that truth? So ask yourself that question this week. What are you doing here? And may you be re-energized and filled, and may you have the divine sustenance and strength to keep going. And may you be filled with hope and new life.